Hello, welcome. Hello, hello, Mariko. How are you today, people? Hey, folks. Hi. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk with a very special guest, which is Christian from Canguro English. Here's his motto: stop studying, start communicating. Hello, everyone. So let's talk to Christian.
Hello, Carol. How are you?
Hi. How are you? I'm so happy to talk to you.
Same. It's great to talk to you.
So how have you been?
Good. Today's Friday, and um, it's been a very busy week. Um, strange weather today. Like early this morning, it was uh, about 25 degrees, full sun, really hot, and now it's raining and cold. It's strange.
Oh. So different weather in the same day.
Yes, four seasons in one day. Yes.
4 seasons in one day. Here it's cold. It's just cold now.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that.
So for people who don't know, I'm from Brazil. I'm Carol, and I have my page on Instagram. And Christian, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Talk about your
So
work.
yeah. So my name is Christian. I'm an English teacher, and I was born in Australia, but I haven't lived in Australia for a long time, for 20 years, and now I live in the north of Spain, in Galicia. Yeah.
Good.
And today is
And
Friday, the best day of the week.
the best day of the week. Sure.
And how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. I like my nose was running a little bit, but I think it's getting better because of the weather that's cold and all. But I've
Yeah,
been
okay.
working too this week. I've been working and yeah.
That's
So
good.
so you live in Spain, and how was it for you to learn Spanish?
Um, well, the truth is that, even though my job is to teach people to learn a second language, and I'm always talking about language and learning languages, and personally, um, learning languages is something that I find really difficult, of course, but really difficult. And I'm very lazy in this respect, right? Very lazy. So if the truth is that if I didn't live in Spain, I probably wouldn't speak Spanish. Well, I definitely wouldn't speak Spanish, right? Um,
So you had to really immerse yourself with Spanish
Yeah,
to learn it.
yeah, basically, the only reason I speak Spanish is because of the necessity, right? Um, and so that's why, if you're trying to learn English and you really need to learn English, it's a really good idea to create necessity, right? So, put yourself in situations where you have no option but to speak English.
You're forced to speak. And do you feel different when you speak in Spanish?
Um, it's funny because I know that a lot of people say that when they speak, maybe if they're speaking Italian they feel more kind of like or if they're speaking yeah, with the hands, but or if they're speaking German they feel more kind of like correct, and but um personally I don't find that I'm a different person. Like I don't find that my personality is different, or I'm more confident or less confident. I just well, one thing is I'm limited by my language abilities, right? So I can't, because I don't have the same level of Spanish as English. I can't express myself with all of the same detail, right? That's one thing. Um, and obviously the second thing is that, you know, it's a question of confidence, you know, like maybe when I'm speaking Spanish, I would be more quiet, maybe because I don't have that same confidence to kind of express myself, you know. So it's not that I'm a different person, but my language ability, um, you know, limits me. Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
what about you? What about you when you're speaking Portuguese or English?
Yeah, I think it's similar. And of course, like I think in the beginning, everyone's more quiet and more timid and maybe more shy when they're learning. And then as now I've reached a good level of English, now I can express that sometimes there are things that I think in Portuguese and I don't know exactly how to say in English. So I think that's what you're saying. So sometimes it's not the same. But it's funny because I was going to tell you that when I record videos in English, I feel better. I think I feel more, I feel happier, and I don't know, I
Okay.
prefer to I'd rather record in English than in Portuguese, even though I know that I have sometimes I watch and then I see, oh, I said that wrong, and then I have to record again, but still I prefer it. I don't know.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, maybe it's not the language. Maybe it's just because you're doing something that you love. You know, you love teaching. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I'm
Um,
talking about something I like, but I can talk about the same thing in Portuguese and I will have more fun talking about it in English for some reason.
interesting. I mean, there is of course one interesting aspect of this conversation, which is that you know when you're speaking another language, you can't use the same you know the same language structures, the same vocabulary from English as in Spanish. Like you know, I have to change the way that I express myself. So in that sense, I suppose maybe I am a little bit different because, you know, it's not necessary for me to go into the cafe and say, "Hey, good morning, how are you? Could you please give me a coffee if you're not too busy?" Right? Here, when I go to the cafe, I'm like, "Hola, café con leche," and that's it. You know, so
Yeah.
you know, there's even though I have two languages, they're two completely different cultures underneath. Mm.
Yes, the culture effect for us, it's the opposite. We have to learn to say always like please and can, because in Portuguese it's similar. You don't need to say like, oh, I want this. It's more direct, and we have to learn that in English we have to do this. Like we have to say excuse me, please. Could I
Yeah,
have?
exactly.
That's what we
Yeah,
teach. Like
exactly.
that you have to say could I have? Yeah. So how do you think the values, the cultural values of a language affects? And do you think you have to take that into consideration when you choose a language to
Um,
learn?
well, I don't. I think if you're going to learn a language, it's important to understand and respect the culture of that language, right? You don't you don't have to adopt the culture, you know, you don't have to live the culture, but you have to understand it and respect it. Because
Mhm.
if you don't, then you can never have, you know, you can never have complete fluency, complete success, because so much of culture is in language. I mean, if and it's the silly things, right? It's like if you bring your Brazilian way of having a conversation, if you bring that into English, I might think that you're rude, or I might think that you're aggressive, or I might think that you're you know, anything like stupid or whatever, right? And so, you know, I need to you need to adapt your kind of well, you need to adapt your way of expression.
That's very important.
Yeah.
And also, do you think that like English now is it's kind of universal. I think we can't say that there's just one culture that's related to English, but they are similar, I think, the English-speaking countries. But what do you think about that? There are more than one culture.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's great marketing to say that you're going to learn British English or American English, right? It's like it's just kind of this marketing technique. But as you say, you know, in reality, you know, even if we look at England, inside the UK, you have so many different types of English, you know, and so many different differences in the way that people express themselves because of the culture. It's like I was talking about this with Emma from Pronunciation with Emma, and she was telling me that because she's from the north of England, and she was saying that in the north of England, you know, people are more direct in general, and so you know, you're in the same country, but when she moves to a different part of that country, she has to adapt. So, you know, a really good language learner is a bit like a chameleon. You know, they're always aware of the cultural necessities. They're aware of how they can adapt their communication styles. They're all really important. You know, really important part of being fluent.
So I like this comparison with the chameleon. I like
That. Yeah. I mean, it's the same. It's the same in any language. Like, for example, you know, you would speak differently with your friends than you would if you were speaking to a policeman or a lawyer or something, right?
Sure, it would be more formal, and we have to
Yeah,
be able to
exactly.
change this. So it's the same. And I think every country has this, like Brazil also has differences inside the country. Like people speak differently. Some people from the north, I'm from the south. Some people from the north might say something to me and I won't understand.
Yeah, and it's really another thing that's really cool, obviously, is that you can be in the same place. Like I can have a neighbor who lives next door, but if they're a different age, then they can speak differently. Like older people, you know, if someone's 80 years old, they're going to have different language to someone who's 18 years old. And maybe also if that person has more money, if they're super rich, they're going to have different way of speaking to a poorer person. And also maybe if that person went to university and got a doctorate, then they're going to speak differently to somebody who had no education. So there's so many different factors, right? So many things.
Yeah, so that's why in an interview I saw you said you were talking to another teacher, and he said that's why sometimes we want to talk like native, but depending on the education of the native, sometimes the native won't know the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. You know, uh, that this is another problem in the language learning industry, right? It's another marketing tool. You know, be like a native speaker. Well, okay, there's 380 million people in the United States that are native speakers. Which one is the native speaker? You know, is it
Yeah.
is it the you know, the black guy who lives in Detroit? Is it the super rich white guy who lives in California? They're both native speakers. You know, it's just marketing.
True. So that's why, like, sometimes when you're going to choose the teacher, he said it's better for you to look at the qualifications, at the experience, than like if it's a native or not. Unless you have something very specific that you're going to live in this place.
Yeah.
And even
Well, I mean, and obviously this is really important for students to know, and also for teachers to know that, you know, you don't need to be a native speaker to be a great teacher, right? And that's not just my opinion. You know, there's been lots of research in classrooms with native, non-native teachers, and you know, whether you're a native teacher or not, you can still be a great teacher or a terrible teacher. You know, it has nothing to do with where you were born. And so students should choose a good teacher instead of choosing a teacher that was born in a particular place.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we talked about the personality. And do you think your voice changes when you talk another language, or your body language?
Well, I think, well, definitely in Spain, there are certain hand gestures, right, that are really, really common. Like, for example, you would do this means like a lot, you know, so if I'm talking in Spanish, I say, wow, you know, that's a lot of people, right? And, or if something is really kind of expensive, I might do this, and I'm like, wow, so expensive. And so I have adopted these gestures, but I think that now I don't only use them in Spanish. I use them in Spanish and also when I'm speaking English. I think so. You know, it's all becoming very mixed. But tone of voice, well, you know, I think there's a lot of similarities in the sound systems, right, between the Spanish sound system and the English sound system. So I don't think that my voice is any different, but I think that if you were speaking a language, a second language, that had a really different sound system, yeah, I think you could sound very different.
Maybe that's why, because I don't think I sound that different too, but I saw a teacher, Hadar, and I think she speaks Hebrew, something like that. And then when she speaks English, she said her voice changes a lot. Maybe it's because it's more different.
Yeah, I mean, Hebrew, you know, they've got some of those strange kind of like, you know, the ha and the ra, you know, kind of sounds, which, yeah, I suppose it's because you're adding all of this extra, you know, for example, if I have a new sound like a r, and I combine that with another vowel, right, like a normal vowel, like an ah or something, then they're going to influence each other, right? They're going to blend. So, you know, I could imagine that if another language has a lot of distinct sounds, that yeah, it would kind of affect all of your other sounds, and yeah, you could sound really different, right? Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Even if it's just like some sounds that are different, they affect the others.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, and this is when students learn pronunciation, when they're studying pronunciation, you know, normally it's not really very effective to study the sounds in isolation, right? You need to practice sounds when they're together because, you know, when you take two sounds and you put them together, it changes everything.
And even words, if you're talking Portuguese, for example, and say just one word in English, it's different than if you say a whole sentence because there's connected speech and
exactly, and emphasis, right? Like I could say the word book, and when I say that word alone, it's like book. It's like but when I put it in a sentence, it has no stress. So yeah, it's important to, you know, and this is true for all parts of language. You know, we can't look at a language as little individual pieces. We need to look at language as big kind of chunks, you know, big trozos.
Sure, big chunks of language. Yeah, it's better to learn. Yeah. So now I have some questions from my followers. The first one is something that more than one people ask. It's like how to go from intermediate to advanced. Like if there are any tips or.
Yeah, intermediate to advanced. Well, this is the unfortunate reality of the language learning curve, right? So hang on a second. So look, the language learning curve looks like this, basically, right? So this is time, and time is your level of English, right? So at the beginning, you progress very quickly. The first 6 months, the first 5 years are really, you're learning a lot. You're learning really fast. But then this is that horrible intermediate to advanced section where you know the grammar, you feel maybe really kind of comfortable, like you don't have to think too much when you speak, right? But there's something about that final 5% or 10% that's just really, it takes a really, really long time. And so, and one example of this is vocabulary, right? So the first 100 words are 50% of all of the language we use every day, right? Then if we move up to 10,000 words, right? So from 100 words to 10,000, that's 95% of all the vocabulary, right? So if you think about it, 10,000 words it's a lot, but it's not impossible, right? It's something that you can do it in a year, let's say, 2 years, right? 1,000 words, 10,000 words. But then that final 5%, right? That difference between 95% and 100% is, let's say, 100,000 words. So basically the curve is the same, right? It's like the final 10% of fluency is something that you will do for the rest of your life.
It's a long process.
Yeah, and I know that some students hate that idea. They think, oh man, like I don't have the energy or the time, but well, number one, it's the truth. There's no avoiding this problem. It's just reality. And the second thing is that, if you have realistic expectations, like if I tell you, listen, you can learn 1,000 words, and that's going to be really good. That's a lot of vocabulary for you. That's great. Then you feel good about that, right? And then if I tell you it's going to take 30 years to learn the next 10,000 words, then you understand how big the process is. And when you sit down to study and you only know 2,000 words, you don't give up, because you know it's going to take forever. So I think that accepting the reality is so important to success.
That's nice. And also enjoying the process, you think? Because if you focus just, oh, I want to know everything, I think it's better if you enjoy the process. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think because it's something that you need to do regularly, and it's something that you need to do for a long time, you have to enjoy it, because otherwise, number one, you're probably not going to succeed. You're going to give up. And also, the second thing is that, language learning should be really fun. I mean, there's so many things about language which are exciting and interesting and funny, and if your classes are really boring, then you need to find a different class or a different teacher. And if you're studying on your own and you hate it, like every time you go to sit down and study, you hate it, you need to change the way that you're studying, right? Because it will only lead to failure. I'm
So
I'm
it's
sorry
about
if I'm
the
sorry
way.
if I'm talking too much.
No, 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 no. I like to hear. And yeah, so it's about the way you see. Like it depends on how you see it. Like you can make it fun or not. Like it's not something. Sometimes it depending on the teacher you have. Maybe you had a teacher that couldn't. Then you will think that English is boring, but not because you can use for anything you like. You can use English with that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, language is just something so fascinating, and I can't understand how an English class can be boring.
And did you learn Spanish more, like you had some classes, or you learned with the immersion there and by yourself?
Yeah, so when I first arrived in Spain, I went to classes with a teacher. She was American, and um, we went to class. Me and my wife. We went to class uh, five days a week, so Monday to Friday, and we went for about three months. But the classes were not very good. Um, she never really explained what what the hell was. She didn't explain anything about like what we were learning. It was like we would just go and she would open the workbook and we would do these activities, but I never got it. Like it never made sense. Like what are all these different verbs? Like how does it all work? She never explained anything, and so I didn't really benefit from those classes. And I learned all my Spanish from teaching English, because when I was in class, students would ask me, well, what does that word mean? And then I'd have to look in the dictionary. And then, but after I've looked in the dictionary for the same word 10 times, I remember it, right? So, and then of course, students would ask me, well, how do I say that sentence in Spanish? So I'd have to try and figure out how to convert this English into Spanish. So I learned by teaching, and that's not it's not a great way to do it, because it takes much longer than proper attention.
But it must be nice, and then probably they would tell you if it made, like, if the sentence you said in Spanish made sense or not, so you could have their feedback or.
Exactly, but
And
I
then
mean,
you.
if you think about it, it's kind of ridiculous, because I didn't know if my Spanish translation was good or not, and they couldn't tell me if it was good because they didn't have a good level of English. So it's just like
Oh,
ridiculous.
uh, so in the beginning it was hard to exchange.
Yeah. So what about you and your experience learning English?
Well, I started very young, so at the beginning I don't even remember much. I remember I was like 4 years old, I think, and then I would I would have some classes at kindergarten. It wasn't even like cool yet, and then I would have, and also my dad would also put some tapes, and then we would listen. Also, he would play some things, and that's when I started. And then I started having classes in an English school, because just the English from school is it's not enough, like that we have in like the school. We have to go to an English school, and then I started having classes there until I was 18 or something, and then after that I'm studying on my own, like.
Okay, cool.
And I went to
Well,
Canada to study, but for 1 month. Oh.
okay, no, and when you were in Canada, was your language like? Did you feel comfortable, or were you like, oh my God, I can't understand anything? Or
No, I was comfortable because I was studying for me. The first time I went with my parents to Disney World, and I already could speak and help my mom because she doesn't speak.
Oh, nice. Okay, awesome, awesome. Well, I mean, that's good, right? Because that's actual like practical use of language. And well, look, I mean, in the comments, people are saying that your English is really good, so you should feel super proud
Thank
of
you.
that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm always working on it because if we stop like studying, then it gets rusty and we forget. So I try to always.
Yeah, look, it's like people send me messages and they say, I want to speak English like you. And I tell them, well, I've been speaking English for 41 years, so it's a long time.
It's a long
You need
time
to
to.
practice a lot.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what tips would you give for people who are beginning and then they still feel shy to speak English?
Mm. Well, look, I know that this seems like a very what's the word I'm looking for? A very kind of standard answer, a very simple answer, like maybe a childish answer, right? But you know, the only way to overcome your fear is to face your fear, um, and that is a lesson from clinical psychology. People who are afraid of spiders can only cure their phobia by being near spiders a lot, right? And so, the only way that you can cure your fear of speaking is to be speaking a lot. And, the reason that most people feel afraid of speaking is because they have no experience in speaking. And, it's very, speaking is very different to a classroom, right? Because normally in a classroom you have like a worksheet, and you have time to think, and it's about time, right? You have a lot of time to think. In a conversation, you have no time to think. I ask you a question, I want a reply now, and so you have to think about the pronunciation, the vocabulary, the all of the topic that we're talking about, and then you have to produce a reply. It's very stressful, and people need, if they want to feel good about conversation, they need experience in conversation.
Yeah, so that it comes naturally because sometimes you know what you want to say, but then you don't know how to say it and the grammar, or sometimes you can't think of all this thing like the subject you're talking and how to say it and the vocabulary. Sometimes but if you have to be fast, sometimes you can't be fast to remember the thing. Even if you know, you can't remember. But if you talk a lot, then you will start to remember.
Exactly. And that's an important part of converting your passive knowledge into active knowledge, right? Like there's normally the students that in my experience, the students that I meet already have enough grammar. They know the grammar. They normally have a lot of passive vocabulary. They don't have experience in using it. And you have to make that connection between knowing something and using it all the time, every day.
And that's why it's easier to understand. First we start understanding, and then after we start to produce the things.
Exactly. Yes,
I'm
exactly.
beginning to learn Italian, and it's like that. I understand, but I can't speak much.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that's normal. I mean, even native, like monolingual native speakers, their passive vocabulary will be much bigger than their active vocabulary. So maybe they know 20,000 words, but they only use 5,000. That's normal. It's just something that happens with language.
And also because of the context, because to listen is easier because it has a context, so you can understand some words that maybe you didn't remember. You understand from the rest. Right?
Yes, context is really important, and that's why. So in that sense, I think conversation is easier than, for example, listening to the radio, because in a conversation, you're in context, and in a conversation, the other person is trying to help you, right? Because they're using their hands, they're using the intonation, and they're helping you, right? But if you're listening to the radio, it's just this one direction monologue, and it's much more difficult.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there are more difficult words and vocabulary because in a conversation you use more normal, common, and daily vocabulary, but in the news they're going to talk about something more specific or more technical.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the worst, the worst is like imagine you're at a train station or at the airport, and they're like, and you're like, what? and all of the native speakers are like, didn't you understand that? I understood that perfectly. They're like, no, I can't. Like on the aeroplane, you're like, and it was like, oh yeah, I understand. Yeah, no problems. I understand perfectly.
Sure. Yeah, it's hard. So, do you have more something, a comment to say? I think we're getting to the end.
Yeah. Look, I think that for any students who are watching, the and like if you really want to learn English, it's all of the basic things, right? It's like find your motivation, have a really good reason to be learning, because you need a very good reason. So find your motivation, practice a lot. So 5 minutes a day, maybe that's what Duolingo says, but that's just not true, right? 5 minutes a day is not enough. Got to practice a lot. And it's about using your language as much as possible. Sitting down and with a workbook and memorizing stuff, that has its place, right? That can be a small part of your learning, but 90%, 95% of your learning should be just using the language that you have to do stuff. So, throwing yourself into conversations, starting a YouTube channel, record a podcast, write a blog, write a book, write some poetry, write a love letter, call up the Coca-Cola customer service line and talk to the person. Just anything, any excuse to use your language.
That's amazing. Great tip, Pussy. Christian, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. I can't believe we had this awesome conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, and
yeah,
keep doing great work, and I hope we can chat again really soon.
Yes, we're gonna say that. Let's keep in touch.
Thanks, and thank you everybody for listening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Awesome talk, right, people? Tell me if you liked it. Of course you liked it. And then you can send me some other. I couldn't keep track of the comments. I don't know if you had asked, but if you have the other question, you can send to me. You can send to him. And thank you so much for listening to us. Bye.